Hello everybody, welcome to today's video. This is going to be a bit of an interesting video today, and I am very excited. Um, it's going to basically be a little bit of some breakdown stuff and a little bit of some pro tip type of video. I hope that you'll soon enjoy it, and without a further ado, let's get right into it. As you can probably see on the screen right now, I just have a very simple heavy dubstep type of pattern. Nothing too crazy, nothing too wild, but it's just to kind of give you an idea of the type of music that I make and the type of sort of patterns that I usually make in my own music. So without a further ado, I just want to show you this. Pretty groovy. I like it. Again, the pattern itself is not really the focal point, but it's more of what is going on in the bass. So it's mostly just this guy. If I can actually open it up, it's Flex. As you can probably tell, there's really not that much going on in terms of like sound design and all this types of stuff, but I still like the way that it sounds, and I actually use it a lot in my newer stuff. And it took me about 30 minutes to about an hour of just messing around with these knobs and different types of things. We will come back to these knobs and kind of break down what they're actually doing, because they actually do have a purpose and they have a point to the sound design. But basically, the sound itself sounds really aggressive. And the only way that I really make it aggressive is just these three things. I can add more things on top of it. I have 10 slots. I have basically 10 different type of post-processing that I can do to make it sound much more aggressive. But I mostly run with just these. So here's what it sounds like with everything on it, and I'll break down what they sound like without them. So, without the distort, we can actually just break it down a little bit faster. So with just EQing, it sounds like this. Pretty intense, but not quite what we want. So let's use a little bit of soft clipper. Again, I'll break down the knobs a little bit later. So let's actually activate that and see what it sounds like. See that there's still a little bit of intensity, but not too much to where it is a little bit piercing your ears and it's too aggressive and it's not nice to listen to. Then the last one is the distortion. With the help of the distortion, it actually pushes the sound forward and actually makes it much more richer in its sound, and it gives it a little bit more texture in the sound itself. A lot of these terms I'll probably break down a little bit later to kind of give you an idea of what it means. But another cool tip on how to do the sound design part, at least, is that I go to Destructor and I add my own. It's called Robotic. It's just my own preset. But then I actually go here, I use the comb filter. I use the comb. Then I turn up the resonance, and then it basically gives it this more robotic feel. So basically all you have to do is just keep turning the knobs until you can get to the point of where you want it to sound like what you want it to sound like. Which is really cool. A lot of people probably use vocodics for that more robotic type of vocoding feel, but this is kind of how I do my stuff. And again, this is not like jockeying on anybody's type of style or, you know, belittling any other artist. This is just how I do my sound. I'll probably just keep it right there just for reference. I'll probably just deactivate it for later. But without a further ado, though, I know you're more interested on how I actually make it much more aggressive with distortion. So without a further wait, let's get into it. So on the screen, as you can probably see right now, is the Destructor Vst. Or I just mostly use it for post-processing. But what's really interesting is that you can do many different types of distortions. You can have pretty much all of these 4 slots have the same distortion type, or you can have a mixture of the same type of distortions, but they all do different things in the knobs. So I might as well just show you the knobs. So with just the fast distortion, it's kind of like the basic default type of distortion you can get. It just adds a little bit more grit. So here's what it sounds like with just the fast distortion. As you can probably tell, it's already aggressive, but if we just keep turning knobs and keep doing things like that, we get a different type of outcome. Much louder and much more aggressive. But really, I just don't really want that much, so I just kind of turn it back down. And so, but mostly it's mostly this guy right here that does all the work for me. Sometimes I don't really need that post filter, so I kind of turn it down some. I kind of leave the color where it is. Color kind of adds more warmth or coldness to the sound, so basically it either makes the sound much more crisp or it makes it much more muddy, depending on the side that you choose it on. I mostly keep it kind of in 50. I may turn it up a little bit, but mostly it's these pre-band and the preamp, where it becomes a little bit trickier to kind of navigate. So we can kind of turn down the preamp and the pre-band. So we can kind of just start at 0 and we can kind of go from there. So here's what it sounds like without them both going on. The sound of the actual bass itself is pretty aggressive as it is, but we want to make it a little bit more aggressive with just these knobs. So I'll turn up the preamp to about 45, maybe 50, just to kind of make it even. So here's what this sounds like with that on. Much more guitar-y and much more heavy metal-esque. And I'm sorry that it really ruined your eardrums. I'm probably gonna have to fix that in editing, but here's what it sounds like when you have the preamp gone and the pre-band, which I'll probably only keep it at 39. Not much of a change, but when you add these both together, you get something pretty cool. Yeah, pretty aggressive. I like it. And when you add these both together, you get something really magical and really, really cool. So I'm just going to go to Soft Clipper just to kind of help alleviate some of the stress on it. And I'll even break down Soft Clipper in just a moment too. So here's what they sound like. I think I probably forgot to mute. It's all right. So with a little help of both of these going on at the same time, it helps amplify the sound and push it forward a little bit more. The pre-band, it helps kind of push the more of the mids and a little bit more of the actual grit of the sound forward, while preamp just amplifies everything to an unhealthy level. Then you add the fast distortion just to give it a little bit more textures, and this is pretty much my sound design. Now, because of how aggressive the sound is, I need a way to make sure that it is not going too aggressive and going too wild. So this is where Soft Clipper comes in. So, with Now, the soft clipper that I use, it only just has 2 knobs, and that's all I really need. The threshold is basically the amount of decibels that it will not allow it to go beyond. So if we turn the threshold all the way up and we play the sound, not much has changed, but the threshold is actually makes it a little bit quieter. Now, let's actually turn the threshold back to where it was, about 5 decibels, and let's turn the post gain down. This is kind of where the sound design comes in. See, I did that on purpose because I knew it was going to happen. The post is actually the post gain. How much, basically how much more volume you add to the sound. So I typically keep it at 70%. It makes it so that more of the sound is actually coming through and not just muddied. So here's what it sounds like at 70. Of course, we can change the threshold and we can even change the post, but mostly the post gain is actually where a lot of my crazy sound design comes in, because it allows more of the sound to come through without being too abrasive and too much giving. So I turned it down to 60%. It basically goes down by like 10% when you use the mouse wheel. And here's what it sounds like now. Pretty interesting, right? But typically I try to move it by just clicking it, holding it, and actually moving it to where I want it. Typically 64% is pretty good. Sometimes I may have to go back to the distortion and add a little bit more of the preamp to amplify everything to just in crazy, crazy levels. And then it comes down to the EQing. Basically, it goes basically from left to right, from your subs, bass, low mids, mids, high mids, and then your treble. Your subs and your bass is kind of where your 808s, your kick drums, and things like that are at, because they are at a lower frequency. Your low mids to your mids is kind of where your percussions type of stay, like your snares, your toms, maybe your bongos, any other kind of percussion that you have. That's where they kind of live, because of well, their percussions. They're not quite bassy, but they're not also quite high in terms of like treble. They're just in the middle, and those are a little bit easier to work with than like the subs and the bass or even the treble. Then you get to the high mids, and then you get to, well, just the treble. These are where your hi-hats, your crashes, sometimes your vocals, if their vocals are in a much higher frequency. And yeah, that's how you mostly separate them. But right now I have my bass more acting like a heel. This is kind of typically how I do it. Sometimes my basses will be a little bit different depending on what the sound sounds like, and yeah, it's pretty interesting. It is also very difficult because you don't want to add too much of pretty much of anything, because it will make the sound a little bit muddied, or it'll make it not as precise and not as clean. So I kind of typically go with this type of look. Sometimes I'll move this guy a little bit over to the right a little bit, but it just all depends on what the song is kind of asking for. And yeah, that's basically on how I do my sound design, at least when it comes to the distortion and the soft clipping. So now let's actually get into the actual VST that I use and the knobs that it actually represents, because it gets a little bit tricky. So again, here is Flex. There are many other VSTs. I'll probably put a bunch of links in the description that you can go and check out yourself if you have these DAWs. I might even put a little bit of some DAWs in the description as well, like Ableton, Logic, Fruity Loops, and probably a few others that I can find. But this one, it's pretty nice. It fucks, basically. And so with the sound that I actually have, that you have heard throughout this entire video, this is basically what it is. So again, the color is kind of the warmth and the cold of the sound. Wide is how wide the sound becomes, in terms of like kind of filling a room or filling in the gaps in the sound. And the anger is, well, at least with this type of sound, is just how aggressive it actually becomes. So let me actually turn down everything to kind of give you an idea of what it actually sounds like. Sounds kind of different, doesn't it? So now I'll actually just break it down. So here's what the color is. I'm actually going to turn it back up to where it was, about 67%. And here's what it sounds like. Cool. Now we're actually going to go to the wide. Now we're going to turn the wide up to about 40%. I think that's where I was at. Sometimes it'll be different. And yeah, let's actually hear it without the color, so you can kind of hear what it sounds like. And like I said, it widens the sound so you can get a little bit more of the sound itself. Then we're going to turn up the anger to about 57% and turn down the wide. And here's where it gets really cool. Yeah. So now we're going to turn up everything back to where it was, about 67% for here, and about 40%. Again, sometimes it's really difficult to kind of figure out where it was, or sometimes the song demands a different type of feel and a different type of bass that you're looking for. So here's basically how I always start off my my sounds. So yeah, that's basically all it does. I also changed the pitch. The pitch is at 185 semitones. Basically it's at a plus 100 of the pitch. Pretty straightforward. Now we're gonna get into the envelopes. Now the envelopes are a little bit crazy. So it's gonna be the attack, the hold, the decay, sustain, and release. Decay and sustain almost act the exact same way, but work in a very different way. So the attack obviously is how fast the sound is played at when you press the button. Does it kind of have a rising sort of action, or does it immediately play when you play it? So let's actually turn up the turn it up kind of all the way, and I'll actually show you what it sounds like. A little bit more aggressive, but as you can tell, the sound, it takes a minute for the sound to actually be played. So yeah, we're going to turn it back down to about 50%. The hold is basically how long the note is holding for, I guess, is kind of the best way I can describe it. So let's actually turn the hold up kind of all the way, and let's actually just see what it sounds like. See, as you turn the hold up, the sound gets a little bit more, I guess, high-pitched. So let's see what happens when you turn it down. Not much of a difference, obviously, and I knew that was going to happen. Another thing is that when you do music a lot or you do it enough, you start to realize certain things will happen, but without even doing it. But you just do it just because it's fun. Decay, decay is how much of the sound it gets through when it's actually playing. So let's turn the decay all the way up, almost all the way up, and see what happens. It almost acts the exact same way that the hold does. But let's see when we turn it almost all the way to the left. Almost acts the exact same way as the hold, but as you can probably tell, the sound really didn't play all that much. So let's see what happens when we just use the volume envelope, which is basically the volume envelope. I forgot to mention this, is basically working with the filter envelope. It's basically how much of the filter is actually coming through into the mix. That's all it is. But anyways, let's get back into this one. A little hard to tell. So if we actually just turn the knobs of the hold, we can actually... And of course, sustain is how much of the sound is being played when it's pressed. So when you turn it all the way up, obviously it's going to sound like what you would expect it to sound. There's a little bit of a sort of a clipping type of thing going on because the sound itself is trying to play as long as the sustain is. And release is obviously how long it takes for the sound that you're playing to release. So basically, if you're holding the sound down, how long does it take to kind of stop playing once you have released the button? So that's all it is. Of course, you have reverb. It acts as more of an echo, but much cooler. And I have, of course, a limiter on it as well. Basically, a lot of them come with the limiter on it by default, so I don't really have to do much. But basically, a lot of my cool sound design comes in with these guys. Mostly with the decay and mostly with the hold. Decay is really cool, especially my newer stuff. It really helps make my sound much richer and make it sound much more refined. So I hope that actually helped a little bit. So if we go to the mixer part, it almost acts the exact same way. You have your mix level, which this is more for how much of the post-processing is coming through into the mixer. Then you have this green guy which mutes and solos it. So if you just click it and you click it again, it'll mute it or solo it depending on which state it is in. You have your little equalizer for this particular one, but of course you have many equalizers that you can use. So it kind of just depends on what you're doing and what you are trying to do. This is the channel rack. This is basically to help with playing the patterns and playing the song, or trying to find a specific pattern that you're trying to look for. So you can go for audio, or you can go for unsorted, which is basically your own basses or your own sort of drum patterns or piano melodies or stuff like that. or you can go to all to kind of see everything that you have so far and see what you can build off of. So this is the panel. Everything is mostly centered. I don't really touch the panning in here. I mostly go into my mixer and do the panning there. But if you want a specific type of panning, then you can use the channel rack panning section. The volume typically is at 78. Almost all of them are at 78. Sometimes they may be louder, depending on if it's a very... it just kind of depends on what they're doing. And then you get into the mixer, the target mixer track. Basically, it's where the sound is going to in the mix, or the bus, or anything that you have set up in there. I basically have everything where I want them to be, and then I'll label them later, and just kind of cool stuff like that. So yeah, that's how I mostly navigate the DAW. There is a cool tip. If you're doing stuff like what I'm doing and you want to name it, you do Control T. You click on that. Then you just click on rename, and you just put, I don't know, something like that, and then it'll rename it. But then you decide that you want to name it something else, or you want to delete it and change it to something else. You just go to it, click on it, press delete, and then you can do Control T again, and you can bring it up again. So that's basically on how I can kind of help my brain kind of figure out where things go in a lot of my projects that are pretty big and there's a lot of stuff going on, and I can kind of help navigate my brain. So now we can actually get into the sample settings, which a lot of cool stuff can actually be happening. So here's a sample of a really good friend of mine by the name of Aiko.
Hi, wake up.
Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, let's actually break it down. So this is the time stretch. This can help basically help put things into key or make things kind of out of key to give it a little bit more of some cool effects. So because of her voice is kind of high, I kind of turn the pitch low depending on where I want it to be. So I kind of like it where it is right now at minus 200 semitones. So here's what it sounds like now.
Hi, wake up.
Changes her completely. Now let's say I wanted to make her a little bit higher pitch. So we can turn it by 400 semitones.
Hi, wake up.
Totally different. So let's actually just keep it at about 380.
Hi, wake up.
Kind of changing her voice completely different. Then the multiplier or multiplicator kind of, because if sometimes samples or vocal samples that you find on the internet are maybe too fast for the song or slower than the song, so sometimes using the time stretch is not enough. Sometimes you need it to be just perfect. So the multiplicator actually makes it pretty nice. Then we get into the pre-computed effects. Right now I have Normalize, which Normalize just takes the sample and amplifies each part of the sample, which is very good for samples that are recorded at very low volume, or you want to kind of add a little bit more amplifying to the sound. Even if it's pretty loud, you still want to just give it a little bit more oomph for it. Then we go into the effects. Pretty much standard stuff. You want to boost the gain, EQ it, ring modulate it, ring modulate frequencies, cutoffs, resonance. You have some reverb, stereo delay. Now, this is where it gets pretty cool. Pogoing. So let me actually grab a pretty quick sample. I'll just show you this kind of live in the video. So let's actually scroll up. Let's go into my downloads. Let's go all the way down to O. Now, let's actually put it towards to where it is in the mixer, and let's actually hear it. Sounds pretty cool. I don't really have to do much of anything. But the pogo is where it gets really interesting. Like a pogo, when you press down on it or use all your weight on it, it shrinks it, basically making it faster. But then when you pop off of it, it extends it or it makes it slower. So knowing that's what happens when you use the sound, let's turn it about 31% and listen to what it does in the sound. If that sounds familiar, I actually use the same vocal sample in my song Rising, and it works just the exact same way. Now there are two ways that you can do it to make it sound like it there's a pitch shift going on. You can use the sample editing pitch shifting, which you could turn like the range up to basically whatever level you want it to go, or you can use pogo, which I used, and it works just the exact same way, but much more refined and much more precise. So now let's do it about 31% to the left and listen to what it sounds like. A little bit different, isn't it? So it starts off fast, super fast, and then it kind of evens out to the actual length in the pitch of the original sample. So basically, just have fun with it. There's probably some stuff that I kind of missed, but I'm kind of strained on time, so let's kind of move on to a little bit more intricate stuff. Now, one of the biggest ones or biggest questions that I kind of get when I am being asked about my music or my music process is, how do I come up with ideas? As you can see on screen, this is actually a new song that I'm working on for a new album. And as you can probably tell from just looking at it, it's pretty hefty. But really, it's really not. A lot of my ideas, I kind of start off with just kind of with this type of pre-drop fake out. And that's all you're gonna be getting. But here is basically where I start a lot of my songs. I start my songs kind of a little bit weird. I start them from the drop, then I work my way backwards to the beginning, because typically I don't know how I want my songs to start or where I want my starting point of my songs to really begin. So it's very difficult for me to like go from the beginning to the drop, because sometimes things can switch up and things can be different as you start working on them. And so a lot of my songs, I kind of just have a really cool drop that I want to work on, and then I work from that to what I want it to build up from. And typically it's been working, but sometimes I will just kind of do a little bit of a random thing and start from the beginning and kind of work from that. But it's a little bit harder to do that. And as you can see, I've been working on it, been adding more stuff. And it may look a little complicated, but the more that I zoom out or zoom back into it and stretch it out and show you a little bit more of what's going on, it's really not all that complicated and all that crazy. At least for me, and probably for those of you who listen to me talk about this type of stuff, it's not that difficult to kind of get the gist of what's going on. So yeah, that's basically on how I mostly do any of my music. I hope that today's video helped you in any kind of way. If you have any more questions, please feel free to to type them out in the comments below, and I'll see you guys later.